All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to MRCC's first Farm Bill webinar, our Farm Bill, what it is and why it matters to all of us. My name is Dina Vanderzalm. I'm the Community Engagement Director at Missouri Rural Crisis Center, MRCC, and I'll be facilitating the conversation today. For those of you who are new to MRCC, we're a statewide farm and rural advocacy organization started in 1985 during the farming crisis of the 1980s. And I'm thrilled to be joined today by Jake Davis, Antonio Tovar, and our own Tim Gibbons to really wrap our minds around what the Farm Bill is. This massive piece of legislation. It touches everything from food and nutrition programs to dictating conservation and even policies that decide really what, when, and how farmers are going to use their land. So we're going to get some insights into that, as well as what some of our priorities are and how we're fighting with our friends, our allies, for a farm bill that really reflects our values. I'll give you a quick spoiler. The current setup of the farm bill really does not favor independent family farmers. So that's why we're seeing some of the struggles that we are in our communities. Before we get started, I wanted to quickly just give you what you can expect. We will hear from each of our speakers and really save questions for the end, but please feel free to go ahead and submit your questions as you're thinking of them using the Q&A feature down at the bottom. If you've got clarifying questions, we'll try to grab those and address them as we can in real time, but we'll be saving the bulk of them for at the end for the Q&A. So fear not, but go ahead and submit them while they're fresh. And then letting folks know this is being recorded. We're going to send around both the recording and the slides. So just be on the lookout for that email. And I want to give a quick bio of our speakers here so you know who your experts are. Jake Davis is an entrepreneur, farmer, consultant, and policy advisor. So he's just got way too much free time. His passion for revitalizing rural communities and safeguarding family farmers really developed early from growing up on a diversified farm in Southwest Missouri. And he launched Local Roots Strategies in 2020 to really help with this revitalization of rural communities, building better food systems, and finding innovative solutions to the significant challenges that our communities are facing. Antonio Tovar is with National Family Farm Coalition. We call them NFFC for short, so you'll probably hear that jargon. And he's worked on social and environmental justice in agriculture since 2005, when he joined the research team at the Farm Worker Association of Florida. And ultimately, he directed that organization from 2017 to 2020. While in that role, he worked really closely with organizations such as NFFC and the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance. And Antonio is also a fellow at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and he's a strong proponent of a science-based policy approach to address the intersection of agriculture, health, and the environment. We love to hear that. And those of you who are familiar with MRCC, Tim Gibbons' name is nothing new to you. He's been part of the team since 2005, really guiding our federal policy work and representing us, more importantly, our family farmer and members in our regional and national coalitions. So he works to organize our membership base, which is farm families, rural communities, and other Missourians, as we challenge the industrialization and corporate control of both of agriculture and our democratic process. So again, go ahead and submit your questions in the Q&A, and I will go ahead and hand it over to Jake first to really talk to us about what is the Farm Bill. Thanks for joining us, Jake.
Thanks, Dina. I appreciate that. And thank you all for joining today. Happy to be here to shed some light on what is a huge piece of legislation that will be debated. It is certainly currently being debated, being discussed in Congress now, and will continue to be discussed throughout the year. So, Dina, if you want to flip to the first slide, I'll just start to give folks a general overview of what the Farm Bill generally is about, right? Which is that it's about spending, right? So the first thing that you should recognize about the Farm Bill is that it does a lot of things. It sets certain policies, regulations, those sorts of things, but primarily what it does is spends federal money. And so we have the Farm Bill authorization process every 5 years. So the last Farm Bill was authorized in 2018. And here's a quick graph to just identify what the projections of the 2018 to 2023 Farm Bill was. And you don't have to sort of know what all these slivers of the pie chart are yet. We'll dig into that a little bit further. But the big thing to recognize is that the Farm Bill is what was in 2018 projected to be at about 428, 425, 430 billion dollars. I said billion with a B, that's right. And so that's over 5 years is sort of what the projected spending was. That spending still, we don't have an exact calculation because we certainly are still in the process of spending money through the Farm Bill, and things have changed pretty dramatically given current events, the COVID-19 crisis. There's been a wide range of natural disasters that have changed dynamics since the 2018 Farm Bill was passed. But these were sort of the initial projections. And so you say, well, where did those initial projections come from? There's an office in Congress called the Congressional Budget Office that estimates through all the vast programs that are issued through the Farm Bill, what each will cost, and they add up a big total. And so we can flip to the next slide, and they make these projections in advance of passing a Farm Bill. So the most recent projections around what the Farm Bill will cost nationally has changed quite a bit. You can see the comparison here. Basically, the other thing to note is that these are 10-year projections, so let's not confuse them with the previous slide. Unfortunately, the Congressional Budget Office projects out spending for 10 years, even though we only pass a 5-year bill. So it's important. You're going to hear in the news, you're going to hear different rhetoric about the idea that it's a $1.5 trillion Farm Bill. The truth of the matter is that that's not quite accurate. It's about half of that. The projection is around $760 billion, which is much, much bigger than the 2018 projection of around 425, but it is not. The overall spending for the 5-year period is not over $1 billion yet. And so you say, well, why is the projection so much bigger? There's a range of things that happened, as I was saying, one being that we had some changes in the way we calculate our nutrition programs, and we can talk about that a little bit when we talk about nutrition. But also some of our commodity programs, the grain supports, those sorts of things that are included in the Farm Bill have been projected to cost significantly more. And so these projections mean that the Farm Bill will ultimately cost quite a lot more. So let's talk about then what is it we're paying for? We're talking about a spending bill. This is a big 5-year spending bill. Well, what is it that we're paying for? And what we're paying for is a wide range. I'll use a phrase that is sometimes used in congressional speak, which is that it's an omnibus bill, which means that it includes a whole bunch of things that folks would want to pass otherwise individually. But when we lump them together, they become one giant bill called the Farm Bill. And so the Farm Bill happens to be organized in these things called titles. That's just a fancy way of saying these are bills that could be standalone individual bills. They cover specific issues. And so I've sort of organized, this is sort of the organization that I have here. It is my general organization of, where the Farm Bill titles fall. This is not a perfect scenario, but you can sort of start to understand the Farm Bill in these categories, right? So on the left side of your screen, you have things that are directly related to production agriculture. So you've got things like when I talked about commodities, right? So the commodity Title 1 of the Farm Bill primarily deals with a small handful of crops. Most of those commodity titles going to things like corn, soybeans, cotton, wheat. So you have some safety nets or price supports that exist inside the commodity title. You have conservation programs that the others can, you're going to hear a lot more about conservation programs and sort of what they do, but generally they have to do with farmers and the way they enhance the stewardship of the land or sometimes not. It also includes things like crop insurance, which is another sort of commodity support, but you can also get crop insurance for livestock or specialty crops or a whole farm crop insurance. When we say specialty crops, we mean fruits and vegetables. Usually the Farm Bill calls them specialty crops. We can have a discussion about why that is later, but that's the sort of structure of those things that are on the left side of your screen. But then we've got those titles that are on the right side of your screen, which are sort of less production agriculture oriented, right? There are things like rural development, which deals with supporting rural electric cooperatives, access to renewable energy dollars, or the rural development programs that support our farmer cooperatives or small rural businesses or rural housing. There's forestry in that category, which is what the U.S. Many people don't recognize that the U.S. Forest Service is held within the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So those kinds of programs are included. It's also important to remember that everything on the screen here only represents about 20% of the overall spending in the Farm Bill. So you say, well, what is the other part of the spending? So if we flip to the next slide, there's one big title that takes up the biggest chunk of spending. That's the nutrition title. Well, what is the nutrition title? We've been hearing about it a lot in the news recently around this debt ceiling fight. It's usually what is called food stamps or SNAP, which is a program that ensures that the hungry folks in America have an opportunity to get access to food. So this is one of our largest consumer safety net or individual safety net programs in the country, and it is included in the Farm Bill. And the way that the calculation of how much money a person needs to sort of survive on a monthly basis, it was recalculated so in the 2018 Farm Bill, there was an expectation that this thing called the Thrifty Food Plan get recalculated, and USDA recalculated that, and not to anyone's surprise, the cost of food certainly went up, and the cost of sustaining a family went up. And so the overall cost of the Farm Bill went up. And so some of the biggest increases in our Farm Bill programs comes through this nutrition title. And that is, although there's a bunch of like farmer safety nets and those sorts of things, this is, an individual safety net. It's also important to recognize that while urban Americans get food stamps, lots of rural Americans get food stamps. So this is a very universal kind of program that's used across the board. And then there are a couple of things this year that folks are fighting that are not included. So we can flip to the next slide, Dina. And then these are two areas where folks have been putting pressure to be saying, we need to include more of these things in the Farm Bill. So there has been a major push. Many of you, if you're following MRCC at all, know that we have a concentration problem in our food system, and that many people have been calling for what's called a competition title, or competition provisions being included in the Farm Bill. So those things, are a wide range of policy ideas, including packers and stockyards reforms, mandatory cool. We'll hear about some of these later in the session, but there's no home for those. There's no specific title for those in the Farm Bill now. It doesn't mean it can't be included. There's also this thing called the miscellaneous title, which lots of things get thrown into. But currently, there's no specific title for competition issues. The other that has been getting a lot of interest is the idea of including labor in the Farm Bill. So farm workers have almost no home in the Farm Bill. They're not protected in any way. There's not opportunities and for them to transition and buy land. Meatpacking workers, we've heard a lot recently about exploitation of children and meatpacking plants and those sorts of things. Those folks don't have protections in the Farm Bill. So many have thus been, encouraging that we do more in the Farm Bill for labor as well, but it's not there yet. and we'll see what happens in here in 2023. So we can flip to the next, Dina. So how does the Farm Bill get done, right? So that's what's in the Farm Bill. What's the process? How do we achieve a Farm Bill? There's really, in the House and the Senate, the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, each of those chambers of our government, each of those chambers of Congress have an agricultural committee. Those agricultural committees are in charge of writing the Farm Bill. So members on those committees, along with other members throughout the House and Senate, will submit ideas, proposals, file bills, do a wide range of things to encourage and try to cajole what ultimately goes into the Farm Bill. The chair and the ranking member, so the chairman and the member of the opposite party, who's the highest ranking person in that committee, the four of them, the House and the Senate, are often called the Four Corners. So those are the four people that and their subsequent staffs that will have a lot to say. So that is in the Senate, Debbie Stabenow from Michigan, Senator Bozeman from Arkansas. In the House, it is G.T. Thompson from Pennsylvania, and it is Representative Scott from Georgia. So that's also those sort of geographic dynamics, those sorts of things will all have important roles to play in the way a Farm Bill gets done. Ultimately, the Farm Bill has to go and pass both open houses so it has to have a floor vote, has to be voted on by the entire body of the Senate and the House. It also has to be agreed on between both chambers. So there has to be a conference, or sometimes one chamber, the House will pass the Senate's version, the Senate will pass the House's version, or sometimes there's a compromise bill between the two. We have divided government now, right? Republicans control the House, Democrats control the Senate. So there will be challenges trying to work out a bill in that conference process. And then ultimately, the bill has to be signed by the president. And so that is the final step. So by now, you might be asking yourself, like, how does this giant piece of legislation even, and it has to go through, it's got all these different things in it, and it's got all these pages. And by the way, the Farm Bill will probably be as many as about 1,000 pages or more ultimately when it's done. And then how does it, and then it has to go through all those steps, just like any bill. How does it actually get done every 5 years? Well, there has been a historic coalition that folks are describing, like that's what passes the Farm Bill, right? And so that's usually been, or historically been, big ag groups that like the commodity groups and Farm Bureau and others. So when I say commodity groups, corn growers, soybean association, et cetera. Pork producers, National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And then, it also includes the folks that care a lot about that nutrition title. So the hunger lobby, the folks like food banks, poverty groups, et cetera. And then what we generally refer to as conservation groups. So this can be everything from groups that care about farmer conservation, but also groups that care about things like wildlife and nature preserving, so like the Nature Conservancy, National Audubon Society, the groups like that. So, and then, at the bottom of that list, I put sort of everyone else, because then there are sort of a wide range of groups that have to do a lot to get a small piece of the Farm Bill, and then pressure a member to vote yes and to move the bill along. I will also say that just in this little section that there has been this particular coalition in a sort of post-COVID era has been kind of fracturing or cracking a bit, and so there's an opportunity to do more in this space and to try to get more voices to the table and to more folks to be heard. So, lastly, I'll say, what happens if we don't get a Farm Bill? Well, there are two really paths that have, that we could go down. If there's no real compromise around what a Farm Bill looks like, then what most generally will happen is an extension. And we've not seen a Farm Bill without an extension in many iterations of the Farm Bill. Sometimes the extension is a few weeks, and sometimes the extension is multiple months or even as much as a year. But ultimately, an extension just means continuing funding and regulatory levels at the same place as we were in the 2018 Farm Bill. If the Farm Bill, if we cannot agree on it, if folks cannot agree on an extension, an expiration of the Farm Bill is actually sort of a double-edged sword, right? We revert back to many underlying laws, things like parity, commodity supports, and those sorts of things, that not that you have to know what all that means, but to know that many of them were passed in the like 1940s, 1960s. They're sort of not equipped to function at today's sort of government standards. And so what we would end up doing is there would still be some basic safety nets for corn, people who are growing corn and soybeans and other sorts of commodities, but we would lose a huge number of programs, things that support local food systems and urban agriculture, and things that support, you know, as I mentioned, like specialty crop growers. A lot of the research funding would go away. So there would be significant losses of you know, both spending and underlying programs that would be hard to sort of get back. So that's one of the other reasons that folks are sort of excited or pressed to get a Farm Bill done. So that was a quick iteration of a very big bill, and there are entire college courses sort of taught on this particular issue. So we could have talked for a lot longer, and I'm happy to answer more questions in Q&A, but that's hopefully a broad overview.
Thank you so much, Jake. It might have been easier if we asked you to say what wasn't in the Farm Bill. But that's wonderful. And yes, definitely, we've gotten a couple of good questions in, but we'll save those for the end. So far, nothing too clarifying. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Antonio with NFFC.
Hello, good afternoon. Very nice to be in here. It's a great honor to share the space with such a great group of experts. And the National Family Farm Coalition, which MRCC is also a member, is also born in that crisis of the 80s. So it's turning 35 years old, and it has 32 members, covered 42 states. It's a national alliance of farmer, ranchers, fisher folk-led organizations, and we are based in DC. But we serve the different groups that are part of this alliance. And if we go to the next slide, I will pretty much outline what we're going to be talking about, what I'm going to be talking about, because as Jake mentioned, the Farm Bill, we see it we can see it in two different contexts, there's different philosophies on how to address the Farm Bill. And the NFFC has some principles that I will talk about, and then we focus in two pillars because like you already saw, it's a huge bill, and we have to be we strategize in terms of what we can cover, what it's more important for our members, and what we are focusing on. So I'm going to be talking about the two main goals for the NFFC and this Farm Bill. So we can go to the next slide. So let's talk about the current Farm Bill and why we are where we are with all this concentration of the agro industry, factory farms, how you want to call it. And this has to be with the philosophy that it's been predominantly in our food system. And one of the main issues is that we are talking about food security, or at least that has been the main reason, the argument used by factory farms or by industry in terms of having food security, not just for the United States, but beyond the United States. So it has been focused on overproduction. And we have overproduction, which you will know, it will decrease the prices for producers. The pretty much is the law of the demand and offer. And so when there is overproduction, the prices will crash and the cost will not change, but the price that you are paid for your production, it's nothing. Only large producers will benefit because they produce in quantity and not in small family farms like we know them. The other philosophy, like I say, the food security beyond our borders is about feeding the world. And this is a very common argument on the national press in terms of, oh, we are getting to 40 million people, billion people in the world, how we are going to feed all these people. Something that it's not well known for a lot of the press, or at least not something that they talk about, is that there is farmers also beyond our border, and most of them are producing enough for their sustainability. And we can see how the US production in many cases hurt the local markets in other countries. We have a good amount of cases, like one is Haiti, that they dump a lot of rice and they crash the rice production in Haiti. Or in Mexico, what is happening with corn, that's also a good example. After NAFTA, the corn industry production in Mexico crashed because it's cheaper to produce corn or rice in the United States that is in Haiti for rice, or in Mexico for corn. So exports has been a excuse, or at least the argument, to put more money into those commodities and not concern about small farmers. There's also the fact of efficiency. And efficiency, we see it as in terms of centralization, concentration, and making easier for consumers to have access to food. And this sounds like a good idea at the beginning, but I think that with COVID, it was clear that this efficiency, it's not what we can understand as resiliency. When you have a very concentrated system, when something breaks, then you don't have a way to survive or to cover the needs of the population. And that's what is happening with this concentration of processing our food. Then is the fact of profitability, or the concentration also for serving not necessarily farmers, but other entities, the insurance companies, the technology that provides efficiency for these farms. And there's interest in the farm bill that it's not necessarily related to agriculture. And this brings us to a way in which they say that it's comfort and convenience in terms of the farm bill, but we see that it's not sustainable or resilient. Sustainable also in terms of how much pollution the current processes of food production we have. It is not sustainable in terms of the natural resources that we use. And like we also hear from Jack, it's not fair for farmers or for farm workers, packing workers, and all the people that is part of our food system. We can go to the next slide. So the principles of the National Family Farm Coalition is a racial equity. We among our members, and I thought you saw flying. It's very diverse. We have a diverse group of members. In the South, we represent many Black farmers who have been discriminated for a long time. In the fisher folk industry, we have also a very diverse number of members, including indigenous peoples, and they are also being discriminated for a long period of time. So racial equity is important for NFFC. The right for food is a concept that has been around for quite a while. Maine was the first state in the United States that adopted this right to food that gives more power to the people in terms of accessing the food that they want, the food that they can produce. So that's another concept that is very important for us. Agroecology, which means a combination of being sustainable, producing sustainable, be conscious about the impact that farm has in the environment, is a concept that is very important, has been around as well for quite some time. Parity prices and fair wages is mainly to talk about having a dignified income for farmers and for workers. There is a good percentage of farmers that have to have an additional job outside the farm to sustain themselves and their families. That's unacceptable. And the other two pieces is be participatory governance. That means that farmers should decide their destiny and also decide about their markets and their production. There has been a lot of guidance in terms of what the farmers are pushed to do, and we don't think that that's sustainable. And finally, international solidarity. The NFFC is member of different organizations internationally. The La Via Campesina is one of them, and we believe that the rights of farmers should be equal in here and beyond our borders. Something I already talked about, how also the production of commodities in the United States impact other countries. So let's jump into the goals of the NFFC. Our first goal is to have fair prices and empower farmers economically. One of our main proposals is about dairy, and this is a historic advocacy process of NFFC. We have dairy producers for a long period of time, and unfortunately, there has been a lot of concentration on dairy. Probably not as much as in corn or soy, but it has been impacted in part because of that overproduction of corn and soy, that it's creating a growing number of CAFOs that are displacing small dairies. And our proposal is basically a supply management system. So there will be a limit in terms of the production on dairy, because right now there is overproduction of dairy and the prices are very low. What is happening in the conventional dairy is something that now is being repeated in organic dairy. Like right now, probably some of you have been some news in terms of how organic dairies are also being closing their doors because there is no way to compete with large operations on dairy. Buy Credit for Farmers Act has to do with a lot of discrimination on Black farmers to access credit, but not just them. Also, small farmers, it's very difficult to go over the different challenges FSA has, or the part of the USDA that provides credit. And we are trying to reform that system. On farm slaughter reform is something that is happening in few states that are suffering for the concentration on slaughters. There is no place to process their meat. So we want to improve on-farm slaughter. And also we want to increase the services that USDA provide for farmers in terms of outreach and training, because in many cases, also cases of discrimination. We can go to the next and last slide, which is our second goal, opposing corporate domination, which we already talked about, like how the industry has a lot of power. Jake mentioned that there's the other groups. I think that we should consider the other groups, and like he mentioned, is a group that is in a very crossroads that we can really make an impact for this farm bill. I think that the conditions have changed a lot. Many of the population in I think that many rural areas already knew, but a lot of urban areas now know how consolidation hurt their access to affordable, healthy, and sustainable food. One of the issues on concentration, and that's why I put how consolidation is happening on farmland, is that there's a lot of investment, not just from agricultural or big ag, but also from financiers, banks, and saving institutions, banks, to invest on farmland. So we want to prevent that concentration on farmland. And there is we have been working to have this bill. It has not been introduced, but we have been working specifically to prevent corporate ownership of land. There is few states that already have bills that prevent corporate access to farmland. We would like to have this at the national level. Packers and Stockyard Act is an old bill that has not been enforced properly, and it has have the consequences of all the concentration that we saw in poultry. MCOOL is something that I know Missouri is well versed, and probably you are going to hear more details about MCOOL, but basically having country of origin for beef is quite important, because a lot of the beef that is coming from the United States, it's coming from Mexico and Canada, who can produce this beef at lower prices than in the United States. There's a lot also of talking about how much China is impacting the production of food. China is not our main competition on food production. In fact, they import a lot of food produced in the United States. But that's a discourse that it's prevailing on the national level. Right to repair is also important. Right now, there's a lot of well, at least the large producers of mechanized, they have preventing the farmers to repair their own tractors. And data privacy is something that is going to be a very common issue right now, because the more technologies require more data, and data can be harvested and can be sold. So it's important to have some data privacy in the Farm Bill. And finally, something that we saw also has a risk is carbon offset markets, because it will incentivize more investment on farmland, which it's already highly concentrated. And I'm going to stop there, because I know that we would like to hear from Tim and have some questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Antonio. And yes, there's so much to dig into. I'll go ahead and hand it over to Tim, but everybody, we're getting some really quick questions. Again, keep putting those into the Q&A down below, and we will jump into Q&A after we hear from Tim. Take it away.
Thank you, Dina. I want to thank everybody for being here. Also want to thank Antonio and Jake for being here as well and giving us their expertise, and Dina for running all the back of the house stuff on this Zoom. We just really appreciate it. This is a really important time in our history, as all times really are. I'm Tim Gibbons. I'm with the Missouri Rural Crisis Center. If you saw my notes, you'd be a little afraid at where I'm going to go because I'm not really sure. But I've been with MRCC, like Dina said, since 2005. And why does that matter? Matters because this is my 4th Farm Bill cycle that I've been personally involved with. MRCC has dealt with lots and lots of farm bills in the past, and we know how important a part of legislation it is. And like previous speakers brought up, there's a lot of moving parts. It's a big piece of legislation, but it's not difficult to understand how bad policy can be made through this piece of legislation, how a bad policy has been made through the Farm Bill, but also knowing the solutions. Like, we not only know what the bad policies are, we know what the good policies are, and we need to have a drastic change in the Farm Bill, which is a bill that not only impacts family farmers, our rural communities, and our food system, but it impacts consumer price, protection of our natural resources. Jake went through a lot of what the Farm Bill touches. The one thing that we do know is that oftentimes policies that are being made, both at the State House here in Missouri and also across our country and at the national level, are not based upon real democracy. They're not based upon representation of the people, of the vast majority of us out here, of farmers and consumers, of other citizens across our country. Instead, what it is a democratic process that's largely impacted by special interests, by corporations and entities that have a lot of money, and then mouthpieces like different commodity groups and the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, which pretty much do their best and pretty successfully kill any good legislation that's being proposed. And that's why we're really trying to get ahead of it right now, before the Farm Bill is drafted. We've seen that there's this history of, and it's going on right now, and it's like a new day in our capital, and the media makes it look like a new day too with their reporting on it, but it's the fight between food stamps and feeding hungry people and farm policy. So what happens all the time, or historically, is there's a group that says we're going to cut all these important programs, including food stamps, which is meant to, feed hungry people, feed people that need help. And they say they're going to cut that, and then they compromise down and create status quo farm bills that really doesn't cut SNAP, may do some things to food stamps that make it more difficult for people to access it, but then the corporations get all of the policy that they want, all of the policies that we're going to be talking about right now. Dina, could you go to the next slide, please? So Missouri, why is this important to Missouri? Missouri has the 2nd largest number of family farms in the country. We're second only to Texas, just short of 100,000 family farms. And we are the second leading state in number of cattle operations. We have just over 50,000 cattle operations, big cow-calf state, and it's a huge economic driver to our rural communities. Hogs used to be really important to our rural communities too. And Dina, if you go to the next slide, we can see what's happened to hogs through pro-corporate bad policy, the policies that they make. And the policies that they make just want to give themselves more market share. They want to kick everybody else out of the market so that they're the only players in town, and then they can make as much money as they want through a monopolistically controlled system. You can see, and the numbers aren't really easy to see, but I have them written down here. The decline in number of hog operations since 1985, we went from 23,000 to just over 2,600. That's over 20,000 hog operations, family farmers put out of business in Missouri, huge economic drivers that were taken out of our rural communities because of bad policy and because of a lack of antitrust rules. The farmer share of the consumer dollar has gone down from about 50% to, or 50 cents or 50% to about 25 cents or 25%. And the retail price of pork has skyrocketed. So it's not good for farmers, it's not good for consumers, but who and what it is good for is those middle corporations that are writing all the laws to make more money for themselves. Dina, if you go to the next slide, please. It's a slower bleed, but we're losing cattle operations too. We've had recently over the last 5-7 years, we have had really low cattle prices, specifically since 2015. And then COVID came along and cattle prices were in the gutter and inflation spiked. So this is what we see when we see prices go down for cattle producers too. We've lost over 28,000 cattle operations in Missouri since the 80s, and we lost over 472,000 cattle operations in the United States. That's because of bad policy. That's because farmers not getting paid cost of production and a living wage, and folks just getting out. Dean, if you can go to the next slide, please. These are our 2023 Farm Bill priorities. You can see it's about stopping corporate factory farms, stopping the public funding of corporate factory farms that give them an advantage at the taxpayer's expense, but also at the farmer's expense, also at our environmental expense. Break up meatpacking giants. Right now, 4 corporations control over 70% of the hog market, and that's Smithfield, JBS, Tyson, and Hormel. And 50% is controlled by 2 foreign corporations, Smithfield and JBS. In cattle, JBS, Cargill, Marfrig, and Tyson control over 80% of the beef marketplace in our country. JBS and Marfrig are both Brazilian corporations. And in the seed market, it's really not any different. We have 3 corporations that are controlling, or 4 corporations, excuse me, that are controlling the vast majority of the seed and chemical markets: BASF, Corteva, Bayer, Monsanto, which is a Germany corporation based out of Germany, and ChemChina, which is based out of China. If you could go to the next slide, Deanna. So these are some real solutions that we're pushing through this Farm Bill cycle and this Farm Bill process, and this is what we're asking y'all to take action within as well. You know, there's no silver bullet to fixing our farm and food policies, but we do know the combination of policies that we need to bring back some semblance of competition back into the livestock marketplace and into the farm and food production. We need to stop subsidizing factory farms, specifically through the guaranteed loan process and through conservation programs like the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, including the new idea of publicly funding anaerobic digesters for corporate factory farms to deal with their waste. EQIP has been taken over by the factory farm lobby, and they use that money to manage their waste. And guaranteed loans are a way that if there's in a volatile market, going to a bank to put up a hog operation, oftentimes the bank would say, that market is too volatile, we're not going to give you money for that. But if they go to FSA and get a guaranteed loan, go back to the bank, and it's backed up 90%, upwards of $1.5 million, then yeah, that bank's going to give you that loan because it's backed up by the U.S. taxpayer. We need to break up meatpacking giants. There are marker bills, both to stop new mergers of large agriculture and food corporations, but then also overall in our economy and industry, there are antitrust marker bills, and marker bills are bills that are sort of introduced and hopefully going to be included into the Farm Bill debate to stop all these mega mergers so that we can review them and that our antitrust regulators can have the teeth to be able to deal with them and break them up. We need to restore competition in the livestock and poultry markets. We need, like past speaker said, we need to pass mandatory country of origin labeling. Right now, there is a bill or a rule that's being proposed by USDA to fix the cool loophole. And people on this call have taken action on that, thank you, which allows imported meat to be labeled product of the United States. But we also need a mandatory country of origin labeling on all of our meat. And then there's other issues down here, increasing the cash market for cattle producers. Instead of allowing these corporations, these beef corporations, to use captive supplies, not only the livestock that they own, but agreements that they have with big feedlots, and then alternative marketing agreements that don't have a fixed base price. So it's a little weedy, but that's what we really need to do to help fix the cattle market. There is a bill that was introduced in the last legislative session by Senator Grassley called the 5014 bill. It's a Grassley tester bill that is forcing corporations to buy livestock off of the market as opposed to using their own livestock to drive prices down to family farmers. And then we got to prioritize independent processing. With the takeover of the cattle industry, with the takeover of the hog industry, we've also seen a lot of businesses on rural Main Street be negatively impacted, and that's the independent processing industry is one of them. So we not only need to support independent processing for more localized and regionalized meat production, but we also need to fix the market so they have a fighting chance to be able to compete against these big mega meat processors. Dina, do you want to go to the next slide? So these are some of the things we can do. And you're going to get an email about this, and we'll be able to contact you about this so you can take action on this. But if you would, please sign the country of origin labeling petition that's demanding mandatory country of origin labeling for all meat in our country. Sign the petition for strong packers and stockyards antitrust rules. We really need antitrust regulation. We need it to not only have teeth, but we need it to be enforced. So there are bills that have been introduced to deal with this, but there's also rules going through the Packers and Stockyards Administration right now that we need to support. Sign up with MRCC to get involved and take action, not only on the 2023 Farm Bill, but also on future issues that affect our food system, family farmers and rural communities. And then last but not least, we're having a second one of these webinar series, the Farm Bill, Factory Farms, Conservation and Competition. And that is going to be with our own Rhonda Perry, our Executive Director, family farmer from Howard County, Ben Lilliston, who's with the Institute for Ag and Trade Policy, and who is the third? Oh, and Doug Doty. Sorry, Doug, a member of MRCC, fourth generation family farmer who employs a lot of conservation on his farm and knows the issue like the back of his hand. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dina and we'll go through some Q&A. I really appreciate it. Please don't ever hesitate to reach out if you need anything from us or have any questions. That's what we're here for. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. And I will invite everyone to come back on camera so we can dig into some of these questions in the time we've got left. I wanted to start with one quick question. Let me see if it's been answered here. That was for Jake about the titles. Did that get answered? So yes, I saw that Bill Powers had asked about the labor title, like seeming like some of these things don't belong in the Farm Bill. It seems like some things are sort of OSHA. Did you want to comment on kind of how the Farm Bill seems to catch all these different categories?
Yeah, so it's a great question. There are things certainly that are jurisdictionally in other spaces that end up in the Farm Bill. There's, I guess, one thing to say is that because we have a divided Congress, there is probably a very few number of bills that are going to pass this year and be signed by the president, and the Farm Bill is likely one of them. So don't be surprised to see things that are not in the jurisdiction of the Farm Bill end up in the Farm Bill.
Absolutely. I want to jump to Dana's question here. Can we talk about the interaction and the intersection between the different titles? So how crop insurance and conservation can be at odds, and the way nutrition title things are administered in ways that support, this corporate producers more than family farmers. Jake, you want to take a stab at that? I'm sure Tim has thoughts on it too.
Well, yeah, I'll certainly start and say that certainly there are big contradictions in the Farm Bill, and that they, to Dana's point, she's pointing out very directly that on one hand, we're incentivizing the overproduction of grain on marginal lands, and we're ensuring the revenue of those folks through crop insurance and price safety net, and then also cleaning up, or attempting to clean up, the overuse of pesticides and herbicides is an example, is a good example. Those kinds of contradictions certainly are sort of all spread out through the Farm Bill, and I would, I would say that that's sort of a bit on purpose from the sort of industrial lobbyists who have written historic Farm Bills, right? They find every opportunity in every title to sort of maximize their value or their outcomes.
I will add on the nutrition piece very quickly, because the nutrition piece I think is very important because the amount of money that goes there. But yes, it has favored corporate, absolutely. It has improved over time, but it's not solved because the way in which this food stamp, quote unquote, goes to families, they used to buy cheap food, which is grains. So it favor corporate production of food. Sorry, Tim.
No, you're good. Thank you, Antonio. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, whoever asked that question. I think it was Dana. The importance of supply management. And here at MRCC, we've been working on that issue for decades, and we're still working on it today. So Jake referred to, the intentional overproduction of commodities. What that does is, if you have a big supply, it drives the price down. Then you have government-supported insurance programs to try to make farmers whole, which are important under the current system, but it doesn't need to be this way. What those low prices for our commodities do is allows factory farm corporations and different processing entities to buy their inputs below cost of production. And the taxpayers are then making up for it, keeping farmers on the land through these insurance programs. But instead, what we need to be fighting for is policies that ensure that farmers get paid cost of production and a living wage from the market. And the way to do that is through supply management programs. Here at MRCC and with our allies with the Campaign for Family Farms and the Environment, which is a coalition of groups that represent farmers, we're working on that right now. It's a complicated thing, but it can be done, and it needs to be done.
Absolutely. We have a question from Kathy about Missouri's congressional delegation. I would open it to really a lot of our congressional, given who is and is not on those committees, right? Missouri does not have great representation on the House and Senate committees per se, but how much do you think our congressional leaders are really understanding the need to support family-owned and operated farms? And I guess we can start with Jake. I see the wheels turning.
Yeah, I will always say, I think they understand it. I think whether they act accordingly has a lot to do with who was providing campaign donations, quite honestly. If you look at the investment of corporate agribusiness lobbying and the investment of the big commodity groups in sort of political realms, they're making huge investments among those congressional delegates. You should look. There's a website called Open Secrets that you can look up how much they donate to your representative or senator. And so I would just keep that in mind, that they probably understand or comprehend, but they act in accordance with sort of where they're getting lobbied from.
Yeah, and I'll just say we've got a systemic problem here. That it's a problem of not having representative democracy. It's a problem of having special interests running the show. We see it down in Jeff City, and we just got done with our legislative session and see how policies are made down there. And if people hang out down there very long and see how policies are made, it's really not good. It's not being run in a really sane way. And we just came back from DC, and MRCC brought some of our farmer members out there, and it's a little more of an ivory tower there, sort of, but the same thing is happening there. Shiny shoe lobbyists are writing the rules. Corporate agribusiness is writing the rules at the expense of us. So, that's what we do here at MRCC is, give opportunities for people to take action within the democratic process and to demand something different. We know the problem and we know the solution once again. So thank you.
Yeah, on a bright side, I will say that we have a great opportunity, because you can have hundreds of lobbies on the industry down here, but the people that vote, the people that it's on the grassroots organizations can make the difference. So don't get disenfranchised about not calling your legislator or really push back about that discourse that the lobbies in here. We are two people in DC, and we have a huge competition, but you can make the difference.
Absolutely. I know we're up on time here. I do want to have one final question for everybody, just because I think it's an important one to end on. But in the question and answer, we have dropped links to the link tree, and then to individual things. So if you want to sign up to get involved, if you want to join the next webinar next week, it'll be the same time on Wednesday, the 7th at noon, and those petitions that Tim named. All of those are there, as well as we have 2 opportunities if you would like to submit photos of things that make you proud of your rural community, the beautiful places you see. or send a video to tell the administration, why family farmers are worth protecting. Those are the soapbox links that are included in that. So feel free to click on those. They will also be in an email. I did just want to end kind of an open question to y'all is, how is this farm bill different from past cycles, right? We said we have an opportunity here. We've mentioned COVID, but we're not in a status quo situation. We're calling for not a status quo farm bill. And I'll let whoever wants to jump in start with that of like, how is this one different?
Well, I'm happy to go first. So I would just say that I think that what Antonio is saying is right more than ever, which is that if the folks that write the Farm Bill historically try to keep it complicated on purpose to keep you out of the process. And more we have channels and avenues and email and Zoom and all these sorts of things to connect us to our leaders. Call, schedule a Zoom with your congressman, ask MRCC to help schedule a meeting with because that kind of pressure is the only kind of pressure that will change things. And we have more tools now than ever to achieve that.
I would say also that, like Jake mentioned, like something broke on the system. And I think that the same way that larger corporations, like they are taking their own way right now, there is also a lot of groups that we didn't talk to each other sometimes. And now we are getting like in the same page. And I'm talking, for instance, on the environmental groups that they are like, oh, yeah, we can work with you. And that's a great opportunity to push back.
And concur with Jake and Antonio. We're at a time right now where we can make a pretty big difference. We've had a global pandemic. We've had rock bottom cattle prices. We've had a food system that has bottlenecked because of challenges. We have an executive order from President Biden that's calling out concentration in industry, including agriculture, and directing his administration to do something about it. And we don't want to pat all of our backs, but the reason why they're doing that is because of what we've been doing for decades, demanding antitrust regulation, demanding competition in an open and fair marketplace. We have marker bills that are addressing that as well, and we're ahead of it right now. I mean, this history of working on farm bills for the last decades, we know what's going on. It's not a new day for us. They do this every time, but now we have more, like Jake said, we have more avenues for people to take action, to let our members of Congress know that we know what's going on out here and we're demanding something different.
Absolutely. Well, I will wrap us up here. I appreciate all of you for joining us. Thank you so much to Jake, to Antonio, and to Tim for shedding so much light on an incredibly complicated situation, but that is really important. If you eat food, this bill is about you. So we appreciate everybody. We hope you'll join us next week for our look at factory farms, conservation, and competition, and how we can dig in a little bit more there. But thank you so much, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.